Hello, I'm Mr. Eliason, and welcome to World History. Today we're going to continue our survey across Asia, dealing with the third of our gunpowder empires, the Mughals. Hopefully you see some recognizable architecture here, so as we travel into South Asia, we're going to introduce you to, again, the third of our Muslim gunpowder empires. So, today our objectives for today are to evaluate the success of Akbar's system of religious fusion, analyze how the actions of Akbar's successors weakened the empire, and then Alamgir's solutions to the various problems that he faced. So, let's get us started. Unfortunately, because of the time period covered by the course, we haven't done much South Asia yet. We really missed the Indus Valley civilization, so I'm going to give the briefest overview of this, the Vedic civilizations, and then just a really, really poor overview of Hinduism before diving into the Mughals. So, one of our civilizational hearths is the Indus Valley civilization, established along, again, the Indus River. They had a complex irrigation system, built large cities like the city of Mohenjo-daro, and in general were a relatively advanced civilization. But because of reasons we don't know, the Indus Valley civilization declined and was replaced by other civilizations who were not related to them. So whereas we have a continuous history of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Chinese civilization, the Indus Valley civilization, to a great extent, kind of died out, and we don't really know where they came from. They were displaced by a group called the Vedics, or Vedic societies, which came sort of from Transoxiana and the plateaus above that area. They moved into South Asia, establishing the Mauryan and Gupta empires, and their dominant religion was something called Hinduism. Hinduism is a religion that developed over a very long period over time. They had specific sort of religious iconography. The two most central ideas in Hinduism is the idea of dharma, the duty of an individual, and karma, the benefits of good and bad actions over time. Your dharma and accumulating or losing karma are tied into both your varna, the class system that Hinduism has, with priests on top, warriors below, businessmen below, and then workers below, and then below them the untouchables. So your varna is what we sort of incorrectly call caste system, and your jati, your job within that caste. Both of these are inherited from your family, although you can move around a little bit by marriage. So if you were born to someone of a Brahmin caste, you would then become a priest or an academic or a ruler. If you were the kshatriya, you become a king or a warrior. If you were born a Sudra, you would be a laborer, etc. Hindus believe in the concept of reincarnation, which is the idea that your body is constantly born, lives a life, and dies, and then is reborn in the constant wheel of samsara, or life. And your goal is eventually to become part of the Brahmin caste, and eventually realize that you are divine, hit that moment of moksha, in order to reach nirvana, this understanding that you are divine, and then you transcend the world. So, your goal is, again, to live as good a life as you can. So good actions lead to good consequences, lead to a good life, and then a rebirth as potentially someone of a higher varna. And so that's sort of the purpose of Hinduism. There's also a lot of gods, a lot of rituals, but Hindus understand that all of this stuff is an illusion for humans, and the heart of Hinduism is this cycle of birth and re-death, the great wheel of samsara. So, briefest, really poor overview of Hinduism, my sincerest apologies, but again, all of the great Hindu empires are outside the scope of this class, so you do need to know the vast majority of people in South Asia are today Hindu, and we will talk about Hinduism again once the Mughal Empire ends, and then of course once the British start showing up. So, the goal of this in Hinduism is, quote, one's own dharma performed imperfectly is better than another's dharma performed well. Destruction in one's own dharma is better, for one to perform another's dharma leads to danger. So it's better to do what you're supposed to be doing poorly than to do something outside of your job, outside of your caste, well. So your duty should be to do what you were born to do the best that you can and not worry about anything else. Islam expanded into South Asia through a series of conquests, after the Islamic conquest. The most famous of this was the Delhi Sultanate, which controlled a significant part of northern South Asia, spreading Islam into those areas, although Islam generally was not a religion that a lot of the common people, especially of southern South Asia, practiced. Although in some of the northern parts, what is today Pakistan and Afghanistan, it did become the dominant religion. Again, these Muslim rulers were known as sultans, similar to what we saw with the Ottomans, and they had taken political control over predominantly Hindu subjects. The group that finally unified most of South Asia was known as the Mughals. The first conqueror of the Mughals, a guy named Babur, led his army of trained cavalry and especially war elephants into combat. These war elephants served as pseudo-tanks, almost unstoppable forces that could then dominate and destroy others on the battlefield. And he used this to conquer a relatively large swath of what is today northern Afghanistan, Pakistan, and northern India. There was significant conflict because, of course, these Muslim conquerors were ruling over predominantly Hindu subjects, and so the Hindus resisted to some extent. And because the Muslims put mostly Muslims in high office, Hindus were often locked out of government positions. And so this conflict between the ruling class of Muslims and the vast majority population Hindu would continue throughout the rest of the Mughal Empire. The second emperor of the Mughals was a guy named Humayun, who was not a particularly good ruler. He ended up being overthrown, losing his empire, and in the end, he and his infant son Akbar were exiled, and he almost destroyed the Mughals, except that again his son Akbar survived and would manage to stage a fantastic comeback. Akbar, the third ruler of the Mughals, was considered the greatest ruler. He was able to integrate the Hindu population through cultural blending and in general tolerance. He abolished the tax that non-Muslims had to pay, the jizya, and he would bring in all different types of religious scholars in an attempt to form a unifying religion to stop people from fighting about this stuff. He also married lots of different wives of all different religious faiths and had a lot of children who then were often allowed to follow their mother's religion. So members of his family were representatives of all the various faiths within South Asia. He held a massive gathering to try to create what was called his universal religion, with him as a divine sovereign. Quote, "There are many differing customs and beliefs of varying religious paths, but the followers of each religion regard the institution of their own religion as better than those of any other. Wherefore I desire on appointed days the books of all religious laws should be brought forward, and the scholars meet and hold discussion, so that I may hear from them, and that each one may determine which is the truest and mightiest religion." In the end, he created this fusion religion that combines some elements of all of them, except he decided that he was the divine sovereign of everything, and people should just worship him instead. And so he would give gifts of his clothing to people, which they were then supposed to venerate as religious objects. And in general, shockingly, this religion never caught on with most people, but they did appreciate the religious tolerance that Akbar's empire provided, even if they didn't, want to worship him as a divine sovereign. Oh, he also had he would give people little portraits of himself that they were supposed to hang under their clothing next to their heart, sort of the way someone would wear a cross necklace in a Christian society, to demonstrate their worshiping of him as the divine sovereign. He also created a political system called the Mansabdar. In the Mansabdari system, Akbar would give positions to people, and all of these positions would have a rank, 1 to 3,000. There were 3,000 mansabs in the entire empire, and he would give them out based on people's competence and their loyalty to him. It's notable that they would then use their salaries from this in order to help support an army and come to support Akbar. And so this is the way Akbar ensured that all of the people of the various provinces were loyal to him. And most importantly, these mansabs could not be handed on down to your heirs. He would appoint each new ruler of each new mansabdar every time one died. And so yes, your son maybe could get your mansab, but only if Akbar allowed it, making sure that all power flowed back to him. And so this system of government and rulership made sure that the ruler of the Mughal Empire would have the loyalty of every one of these different provinces. Akbar was also interested in science and learning, bringing together scholars from all around the world, and he once performed an experiment where he locked a bunch of infants away and allowed no one to speak to them to see if there was a universal natural language of humanity. It turned out there wasn't, and this is an example of either Akbar's total cruelty and indifference to the suffering of humans, or also his natural curiosity in trying to learn about life. So, neat or horrific? His son, Jahangir, was not the best ruler. He was addicted to opium, and so he spent most of his time in his little opium palace, high on opium. He's noteworthy, though, because he brought in a lot of foreign artists and loved to have stuff painted sort of in Renaissance style. And so you could see him painted in here. Here's Jahangir, painted in with other European and other great rulers, again demonstrating his power and bringing new ideas to South Asia and the Mughal Empire. Jahangir also tried to deal with the problems of taxation. Although canceling taxes on everyone is incredibly popular, it did eventually lead to a financial crisis. And so he had these complicated rules to try to solve these problems, which didn't totally work. His son, Shah Jahan, was one of the most famous Mughal rulers because he constructed this building here, the Taj Mahal, as a mausoleum for his deceased wife. And so he's responsible for creating this amazing cultural heritage site that has become one of the most recognizable buildings in the world today. So Shah Jahan gave us the Taj Mahal. But the most important ruler of the late Mughal Empire is Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb was Shah Jahan's son. He argued he wanted to inherit the throne before Shah Jahan was ready, and so he had his father arrested and thrown in prison. And then he tried to exert Muslim control over the empire, excluding Hindus from public office and ensuring that only Muslims would be able to hold the highest positions, mansabs, in the empire. This led to significant rebellions from Hindu princes and led Alamgir to reinstate the tax on non-Muslims to try to raise money, which led to further revolts and rebellions. These Maratha separatists, these Hindu kingdoms, won a series of battles and started to re-exert their dominance. And so in the late Mughal years, the Muslim rulers started to lose significant territory, especially along the coast. And this was made worse with the arrival of the Ferengis. We'll deal with this next unit, but European traders have started to move into the Indian Ocean. Both the Portuguese and the Dutch are now pirating around, raiding ships and attacking coastal cities. The Mughals, being a predominantly landlocked empire, did not have a massive navy, and so they could not deal with these Ferengi traders who were taking over significant territory and cutting off Indian Ocean trade. And so the crisis of the financial issues brought on partially by Akbar's policies, but partially his successors. The taxes leading to rebellions of Hindu princes unhappy under Mughal rule was a significant factor. And finally, foreign attacks from these Ferengis started weakening the Mughal Empire, leading to its gradual slide. The Mughals are going to continue to exist for another couple hundred years, but much like the Ottoman Empire, their greatest days are behind them, and they're going to be encroached upon by a number of other powers. So, hopefully, you can answer the major objectives for today and have a decent sense of both why the Mughal Empire was so successful and why it eventually started to decline. Thank you for listening.